Welcome to episode 222 of the Necronomicon.com. I guess we're 1/3 of the way there. I am James Sabata, horror author, screenwriter, co-host of the podcast you're listening to right now. And I was amazed by this movie because Justin Long was the good guy and nothing bad happened to him. My esteemed co-host has run away for a month, so you're stuck with just me and my guests. Luckily for you, I have good guests. Joining me today, Ruthann Jagge's here. Ruthann, I've wanted you on this show since we met, and we're finally here.
Thanks, James. I'm thrilled to be here. I'm a big fan of the podcast. And likewise, we did meet for the first time in Denver post-COVID. It was the first big convention after COVID, and everybody was just so excited to be out in the world again. And you did the wonderful event, Spirited Giving at the Stanley, which was epic and hotter than hell. I don't know what the heck was in Colorado that week, but there were record temperatures and we were all sweating and miserable, but it was just the most incredible event.
And they don't have any AC at that place. The concert hall was hot as hell. And I had my shirt like untucked and I was like, this is so unprofessional and I don't care. And we were all dying. And the weirdest part of that is it snowed the week before we were there. And it snowed the week after we were there. And it was hot as hell while we were there.
I'm going to take that as some kind of omen. You triggered a switch. You flipped a switch. And plus, the hotel was under construction. So literally, when we were walking to our rooms in the main hotel of the Stanley, it was terrifying. You just didn't know what was going on because you had to go down some unusual hallways because some of the main configuration was not accessible to guests. And for anybody that doesn't know what we're talking about, the Stanley is the hotel in Colorado that was used for Stephen King's movie, The Shining, about the haunted hotel. So we as guests at the event had some very strange things going on while we were there as well.
Oh, did you have weird stuff happen?
Oh, yeah. Oh, I didn't sleep all night. I went up to my room about 11:30 and I had a nice room. It was lovely. But like you mentioned, there was no air conditioning and there was a mirror on the closet right opposite my bed. So I had this beautiful 4-poster bed and I looked right into a mirror. Now, that should have been my first clue that I should have tried to drape something over it or sleep on the floor. But no, I tried to doze off. And every time I kind of woke up, it felt like there were 3 faces looking back at me out of the mirror.
Oh my gosh.
I had a sleepless night like everybody else did.
Oh yeah.
I think we were just so psyched about being there. But the reputation, of course, precedes the structure. So I don't think anybody had a lot of sleep that night for whatever reason. It might have just been in our head. I'm going to think it was really strange there.
It was definitely strange. And I swear we're going to back up and do the whole introduce yourself to our listeners part and all that. But I got to tell you this. So people have been slowly sending me their stories of the weird shit that happened to them at the Stanley. One of my favorites, Bridget Brave, was talking about how she felt like somebody right over her. And then she looked at her husband and he was way over on the other side of the bed, like asleep. She was freezing and he was fine. And then he reached over to where she was and the air was ice cold above her. Another friend was in the shower and he had it on hot water and he was rinsing shampoo out of his hair, so not looking at it. And as he opened his eyes, he literally saw the faucet turn to cold. And I guess he screamed like a little girl. And, his person he was sharing a room with came running in and all that good stuff. But these are the stories I keep getting. And mine, I don't know if I've told it on this show or not, but I was told by the person that the events person who runs events there at the time, she told me months beforehand. She was like, look, you're not going to believe me. No one ever does. Everyone who throws an event here pays a price of some sort. She's like, something will happen while you're here. And I was like, yeah, okay, sure. And then, I got there and I'm walking around and I'm like, I'm buying into the hype. No, whatever. And she took me on a private tour. I got to go down in like the tunnels and all that good stuff,
Oh, awesome.
and we were playing with the mirror that supposedly occasionally shows reflections, and none of that happened, right? I'm checking out. I've got 10 minutes left in my hotel room. I'm packing up. My laptop's sitting on my bed. I'm not near my bed. I'm like over on the nightstand away from it, right? And I look over in time to see my laptop pop up in the air and go bouncing across the floor like 4 times, and pieces just breaking off my laptop. And I'm just standing there like screaming because this is I'm a writer. This is my life, this is my baby. And it still works fine. I literally still have it, but there's a big gaping hole under the monitor before the keyboard from where pieces broke off. But I didn't touch it. I didn't pound the bed. I didn't do anything.
Oh.
And it just flew up in the air. And so I guess that's the price I paid.
I guess you did pay the price. Yeah, I think there's probably more stories. I also think we all paid the price because, like I said, it had to have been 110 degrees there while we were there. It was
ridiculous.
So unusually, extraordinarily hot for that area where it's located, and it was just unheard of. Nobody could believe it was that hot while we were there.
And then we packed 300 people into the concert hall with no AC.
I can't even talk about it. But hey, I got to meet Stephen Graham Jones and Gabino for the first time, and so many other wonderful things happened. We all didn't mind if we had rivers of sweat running down our back.
Well, let's back up. Why don't you tell our listeners a bit about yourself and your books and your wonderful writing partner and all that good stuff?
I sure will. Well, I've been writing professionally for about 5 years, and I started out in short stories. I've been published in many anthologies. I've kind of lost track of how many anthologies. And then I did a solo novella. And along the way, I connected with a fabulous woman in Scotland named Natasha Sinclair, who has become my writing partner and one of my very best friends in life. And together, we've started our own imprint, and we've called it Brazen Folklore. We tend to do a lot of unusual kind of horror in that it's heavily based on mythology and folklore, particularly in Scotland. And it's really funny the way kind of some of that came together. I had this idea of a novel I wanted to write, and I approached Natasha and said, hey, I've got this really cool idea for this structure on this rural island in Scotland, and there's strange things that happen. And she's like, I'm all in, but let's base it on Scottish folklore. I live on a cattle ranch in Texas. I knew nothing about Scottish folklore. So needless to say, it took us about 1.5 years to get the novel out, and the response has been phenomenal. I won't mention that it's on the list you're not supposed to mention for recommended reading for a major award. We've just had such a great time with the novel since it released last February. It's book 1 of a trilogy, and book 2 is scheduled to release on February 1st. And that one will be called The Delavan Diaries. In the meantime, we also decided to start a newsletter, a quarterly newsletter. We don't do anything simple. So instead of just a regular newsletter, it turned into a 70-page glossy full color magazine. So 4 times a year, we also produce Be Brazen, which is our newsletter. It gives a lot of information and a lot of photos because I go to conventions and events here in the United States, and she does likewise over in Scotland. She's also rural. She lives outside of Glasgow. So there are a lot of really wonderful events over in Scotland. And unlike us, where we have to go and kind of most of our events are in hotel ballrooms or that
Yeah.
kind of thing, unless it's one of your events. They have these Gothic cathedrals that are over 250 years old. They hold their book conventions and events in. So she gets to do some really cool things
Oh,
over there.
man.
It's just kind of evolved into a full-time job. I think like most of us, I started writing, quote unquote, as a hobby, but if you're truly a writer, it never stays a hobby for long because there's something in you that always wants more. And I don't mean that in a competitive level. It means you want to push yourself to be the absolute best you can be. But I feel so fortunate that it's such a huge part of my life anymore. And I'm really looking forward to next year. I think there's a lot of really neat things going on as the business of writing, particularly in the horror genre, continues to evolve. So I think next year is poised to just break open a lot of neat things, for all of us, whether it's film, whether it's writing, whatever creative endeavor you're in within the genre. I think there is a great renaissance going on. And that's another reason people are anxious and eager to watch a lot of the movies. One of the trendy ones, or the more recent ones that you and I were just talking about prior to the interview, I think a lot of people are just hungry for this. I think there's so much craziness going on in our day-to-day life. It's another form of escapism that people are really starting to enjoy. I say this to my friends and my husband on a regular basis. Flip around your Netflix and flip around your streaming services. I would say 80% of what's on there, A, is either Stephen King's story, or B, it's based somehow in some kind of dark comedy, horror, whatever. So it's currently the renaissance of the genre, in my opinion. And I think there's so many incredible people really pushing it to the limit and doing such wonderful things. I'm really excited about what's coming down the line.
I love that. Yeah, I mean, my wife and I were talking about it. We watched the Doctor Who 60th anniversary special, and I was telling her how many people I know who love Doctor Who, and they're like, "Oh, I don't like horror." And I'm like, Doctor Who is horror as hell. It's just no blood. And that's like the only thing that's really missing. And so we were talking about it with this episode because there was a lot of like jump scares and creepy dolls and stuff like that. And then we were kind of talking about how I feel like streaming has opened so many doors for horror because there's so many more. Yeah, there's just so many more opportunities for independent films, or you can go out of your way to find creature features or all these different things. But it's also opened so many, like, I call them doorways to horror or gateways to horror. And I look at like the success of like Stranger Things, and you can't tell me everybody watching it was a horror fan before. And so that's bringing them in, and then they're finding other things they like, and they're branching out. And, you have Ghostbusters coming back and making this huge push now. And
for us literary nerds, things like The Sandman. I mean, those of us that read those books and we were so hungry for the visuals, now we can get the visuals.
Oh yeah. No, it's so wonderful. And then you have that happening in writing as well. I feel like all these so there was this a time when publishers were not as nice to horror, and we were always kind of the ignored or the strange ones or whatever else. And I feel like horror is just everywhere now. Every bookstore I go in used to be just Stephen King and a couple other books. And you still have that, especially at the bigger ones like Barnes and Noble or things like that. And I get that, but they're at least trying. They're adding more shelves. You're seeing Eric LaRocca all of a sudden. And when I see Eric LaRocca at a Barnes and Noble, it just makes my day. It's so great. And
he's such a great guy.
Oh yeah. And it's like, I feel like if I go into a smaller bookstore, or not a chain bookstore, right? Like I'm seeing so many. Yeah, thank you. I'm seeing so many names I know, and I'm like, these guys would have never been here before. Like it's so cool. Obviously, everybody knows Laurel Hightower is one of my closest friends. When I see one of her books, every time I just like get so excited and try to give it to somebody near me. And but even like Clay McLeod Chapman, any of these people, it's so cool to see all these. And I think the small publishers are helping so much with that. We don't have to rely on the big five. We're getting people like Tenebris or Darklit or these other ones who just care so much about the genre. We're getting fantastic results because of it and more opportunities.
I think you're absolutely right. I think that even carries over into the filmmaking. If you remember, and I was in Pittsburgh this year at StokerCon also, and they have the film festival on Friday night, which is just probably one of the most fun events of the whole.
Oh, yeah.
And you get these little 10-minute films. And this year it was opened up internationally. I've got to tell you, the talent blew me away. To be able to tell a whole story in 10 minutes like that and have an audience of 300 people captive and clapping and throwing popcorn and carrying on, enjoying it so much. I just think we're living in an exciting time with the genre. And it hasn't been easy coming. And you did touch on that. For a long time, people didn't take it seriously. But I'll take it back to when my grandson was little. I was playing Plants and Zombies with him, the video game.
Oh, yeah.
These kids are exposed to this now at such a young age with the video games. And there's so much great YA material coming out. And here's the other thing, James. People are reading again. We can say it's one of the things that came out of COVID. We can say it's a different way of teaching the kids. People are reading again of all ages. For so long, they weren't. And books are selling again, and people are reading again. And younger kids and the YA market, young adult market, is probably one of the top 3 hot markets out there right now. These kids want to read this stuff. They want the fantasy. They want the creativity. It inspires them. And I just think it's just, like I said, a really exciting time to be connected to the genre in any way.
Absolutely. And even at cons, we see it. We see these young kids come up and they're knocking out arguments that I'm like, would you like my podcast? Because you're doing a better job of it than I do. You know, like, they're so smart. They're so good at reading themes and critically thinking. And oh my God, yeah. And I can't wait to see what they're all cranking out when they're making stuff. You know, it's going to be. It might not all be for us, but it's going to be amazing, whatever it is. So.
I think so too, because their capacity to learn starts much younger. And they're much smarter. And like I said, they're born with the tech in their hands. And whether you write or you make films or you do graphic novels or comics or whatever the correct term is currently, there's so many tools available to them. We didn't have that. I mean, I still scratch out a lot of my first drafts in a notebook, like a lot of people still do. And then I go in and I chop around in the, Word, and I chop around on Google Docs. But these kids, they're so elevated in what they can do with the tools. I think it's really going to prompt them to even do more and push the stories farther. And a lot of them are traveling a lot younger. I don't know about you, but I didn't travel till I was adult. These kids are going all over the world and they're like 12 years old. And I think that also inspires a love of learning about other cultures. And along with learning about other cultures, and this does touch on the movie that we're going into, you learn about their superstitions. You learn what is scary in the cultures. Every culture has a boogeyman. There's so many crossovers. I have traveled extensively, and a lot of the world, you get the same creature, as it were, but they're called by a different name. So I think these kids that are being exposed to travel, they're being exposed to more media. I think they're going to be probably more creative. It may not be the way we're creative, but it's going to be creative in a different way.
I love it. Yeah. And even the simplicity, not simplicity, but even they have the internet. If you want to find an artist for your comic book, you can do so. When I was, 20 and I wanted to make one, I had to settle for my friend who knew how to draw somewhat, because that's everybody I'm going to meet soon. So
exactly.
But yeah. So speaking of the movie, obviously we're here to talk about Drag Me to Hell.
We are. And it's one of my favorites. And I wish I could tell you why it's one of my favorites. It's just so outrageously campy in parts, but there's such a moral conundrum going on. It's very human to me. Natasha and I tend to write very strong female protagonists in a lot of my stories, but we do kind of lean towards folklore. And I think a lot of it, and I've been asked this in other interviews, is because I am very rural. If you look out the windows of my house, I'm surrounded by cornfields. I mean, I don't live kind of where a lot of people live, and she doesn't either. So when we talk about folklore, and Drag Me to Hell is very much a folklore horror movie, you're talking about what makes up the elements of folk horror. And in this instance, in particular, it's a curse. So I think when you do live in a rural area, you tend to read between the rows, and I mean rows of corn. There's strange noises at night. You can hear things. It's a little more quiet. I think that when you get into that aspect of the movie and the curse, it relates very much to some of the stories I've written, and it relates back to Delavan House, which is our first novel in the trilogy. I'm so attracted to the film because, and I think you and I touched on this, it's a moral conundrum for a young woman, just like a lot of young women in the corporate setting today, who has a tough decision to make, and she wants something really bad. And it basically comes down to how far is she willing to go to get it? And we see this in social media with the influencers. We see it in so many aspects of life anymore, where things are hard for young people currently, and particularly young women. So sometimes the choices they make, even though they're good people, they don't think of the repercussions. They only think of the immediate gratification. And in Drag Me to Hell, we've got our main protagonist, who's a lovely young woman named Christine Brown, who works at a bank, and she has an opportunity, or she's in the running to be promoted to an assistant manager. Well, she's up against a young man who knows how to work it with the head honcho a little bit smoother. He kind of goes into the good old boy stuff, and they're kind of demeaning of Christine, and she's good at what her job is, but they don't really think that she's qualified to go any farther. I mean, it's so stereotypical when the movie starts out. But then there's an incident and something happens, just like when you're classic folk horror, there's always a catalyst. Something happens, and the way the story tends to unfold is because of the beliefs of either a country, town, setting, background, influence. It may not be what she's involved in, but because something happens via her connection to Mrs. Ganesh, everything changes for Christine.
Oh, yeah. Even just backing up a second to Stu, the guy you were talking about, who's in the Good Old Boys Club, the moment where he puts in a sandwich order as well, I already want to punch the dude. Yeah. I'm like, what a dick. It'd be one thing to be like, hey, would you mind getting me this? Here's some cash. Like, if you're cool, but no, he hits that.
He assumes he's in the same position as I'm assuming it's the bank manager. Yeah. And this guy has had such a long career, and I made a note of his name, David Payer. And he is probably one of the most prolific character actors out there. And nobody knows his name, but when you see his face, you know him immediately. He's been in so many things. So the bank manager is putting in this sandwich order, and the other young man, he decides he's going to have the exact same thing. But he acts like Christine messed up his order when she returns from the takeout place with the order. And of course, they both roll their eyes at her absolute incompetence. And I think you're bringing that up is a very pivotal moment in the movie, because I think this young woman realizes she's going to have to do something to knock the chair out from under her competition for the assistant manager position.
I mean, even the fact that the bank manager is giving her an order to begin with tells you where he thinks she is. Mm-hmm. Like he's not looking at her as the next person in this promoted. I don't remember. Was it an assistant manager? Is that what the position was?
Yes, it was assistant.
I thought so.
Manager. Yeah.
Yeah. So he's not looking at her as that person. Like that's obvious.
No.
And then this other guy doing it, and the bank manager not doing anything about it or questioning it in any way, tells you everything you need to know here. This is such tight writing. It's so beautiful. But it just immediately puts me in this this understanding when Christine has to make a choice of why she would do this. And I think that that's just pivotal. I read so much online about how she starts out kind and then her choices take her down this road. And the whole time I was screaming at these comments going, what fucking choices? They haven't left her any choices. This is what she has to do.
From the beginning.
Yeah. Like she's just put on this course. I don't even think these are choices.
I don't think so either. The only choice she does make, and as the story goes on, and I'm always hesitant to give away the whole plot of anything. I never review whether it's written or verbal. I never try to give away anything. But an elderly woman comes in and literally begs Christine to give her an extension on her mortgage payment. For whatever reason, whether it's a bank error, and that does happen, or this woman has just fallen on hard times, she literally, and there's a scene, it's a really great scene, but this woman comes in and she wants Christine to ask. She asks her if she can get her an extension. And she goes to the manager and she says, what can we do for her? I feel bad for her. And this is where the manager says, well, Christine, I'm leaving it up to you. And that's where she makes her first really bad decision. But it's based on the fact that she's trying so hard to be a people pleaser at that point. She wants the manager to see she's capable of making the hard choices that a managerial position would insist on. So she tells this poor old woman that she can't help her, that she will not give her an extension. And when I say the woman begs, she's literally on her knees in the bank. And if that's not one of the most humbling scenes of any film, and you've got this wretched old woman on her knees, pulling on her skirt, begging her, I mean, it's just gut-wrenching. And everybody's looking at this woman like she's just dirt under their shoe. And Christine holds her position, and she calls security, and everybody's in an uproar. And as Mrs. Ganush is leaving, and that's the elderly woman, and I should mention here, and we can dance around this a little because I don't want to get into too much cultural appropriation, but it is the movie. She is of Romani Gypsy descent. So the stereotype of her character is that she throws a major curse on Christine at that point as they're dragging her out of the bank. This is where basically Christine's life becomes doomed, shall we say, because of the curse that's thrown on her. And once again, it's classic folk horror, which you just don't see it spelled out so black and white in a lot of the movies currently. But I mean, is there anything more powerful than a gypsy curse? I mean, there's curses of all different kinds, but when we think about gypsy curse, and I'll use another example here, Richard Bachman.
Oh, hell yeah.
Stephen
My
King's
favorite.
name, wrote a little novella called Thinner, which was also one of my favorites. And it's a story of a man who also becomes cursed because he does something dishonest. Now, I can interject here and I say, these people that get these curses typically do something to deserve them. These wonderful people are not going around and just randomly. I mean, you've pretty much got to screw them over before they throw a curse on you.
I mean, if they want to throw me the Thinner curse for a bit, but turn it off in like a couple weeks, I'd be down with that.
I could use 20 pounds. Yeah, I wouldn't mind that.
We could be cashing in on that today.
Yeah, but I think at that point, when Mrs. Ganush throws the curse on Christine, it sets the tone for the rest of the film. And up until that point, we see her as kind of a normal girl, and she's got a normal boyfriend, only he does come from money, and we get the feeling that she's kind of middle class and she needs to elevate herself, and she's trying to work her way up for her own self-confidence. But at that moment, when Christine has the curse placed on her, everything changes. The whole tone of the movie changes at that point for me.
Oh, absolutely. And one of the things I find so fascinating about this film is Mrs. Ganush she's doing the whole, you shamed me. And shame is such a huge theme in this. Everything with Christine revolves around shame. The first time we see her, she's trying to adjust how she speaks because she doesn't want her accent to come through. She doesn't want people to know she's a farm girl and all that kind of stuff. And then you find out about her boyfriend's family and why this is bothering her so much. And how his mom literally talks shit about her being from a farm repeatedly, but it goes further than that. Like, she's ashamed later that she couldn't give this loan extension to Mrs. Ganush. And she's ashamed when she's being haunted by the demonic force, or whatever you want to call it, the Lamia. And even like the things that she has to do to break the curse, whether it's the cat or paying the soothsayer guy, or even like how she almost gives the button to other people. She's ashamed of all of those pieces. And I think it's amazing how good this is at mirroring the shame between the two women, even though they're very, very different, and how that shame controls their actions.
I think that's a great point. Yeah, I think it's very valid, and I think it's very real, because I think it is such a what's the word I want? It's such a strong, gut-wrenching emotion. When you're shamed, there's not much worse than being embarrassed than being shamed. And she does try to rectify the situation. She takes it upon herself to go to Mrs. Ganush's home and walks into, once again, a celebration or a stereotypical ceremony. But Mrs. Ganush has passed away, and Christine cannot rectify the situation. And at one point, her daughter says, I know what you did. You deserve everything that's coming to you. So we need to mention a little something here, and we can get into the demonic possession, which is another strong folklore aspect in the movie. When Mrs. Ganush throws the curse, she invokes an ancient entity called a lamia, which tends to look like an innocent goat, lamb, black Phillip, whatever you want to call it. It's different things in different cultures. But she invokes this lamia. And according to the legend, there are 3 days and 3 nights before this creature comes to claim your soul. And Christine is already starting to experience some hallucination. She's already starting to feel physically ill in some sense. And when I first saw this film, and even when I did the rewatch of it, I couldn't really tell at first whether she was just sick at heart over what had happened. I thought maybe she was physically manifesting because she was just so upset about the whole situation. And then we learn that there is a dark shadow following her in this demonic lamia, who's basically been sicked on her by Mrs. Ganesha's curse. And I have to say, this is where the Black comedy comes into the whole. It's the first time when Mrs. Ganesha's body falls out of the casket and lands on the floor. Oh my God, it's just so classic Sam Raimi. You know what I mean? It's just,
oh, absolutely.
The jump scares in this film are just, what in the world? They're so outrageous and so fabulous. And for a 2009 movie, James, they kind of pushed the limit on some of this. I mean, it was
absolutely.
gory. It was nasty. I mean, they weren't pushing the limit like they do now with all the sex and all the add-ons and special effects and CG and all that. They were just pushing the limit with horror. When this old woman's body falls out of the casket, rolls across the room and lands at Christine's feet, the first time you see that, you're like, oh, hell no. Because I don't think there's one of us that have attended a service or a funeral that haven't hoped it wouldn't happen. You know, it's one of those childhood fears. Like, please don't let grandma roll out, you know, but in this movie, she does. And it's just so absolutely horrific. And that for me is one of the other tones of the film while you're watching these very intense scenarios. There's also some incredible jump scares and just some very Black humor in the mix. Very human humor.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, there's so many just great moments. And I feel like that's one of the things Raimi does so well. Like, this isn't Evil Dead level of insanity. It's like nods to that. It's things that are funny in life. And if I was at this funeral celebration, whatever you want to call it, and that happened, that would be amazing. Like, can you imagine this woman that you view as screwing over your friend, grandma, whatever she is, your mother, you know, this woman that you view as screwing her over has this happen to her? Oh man, I would laugh my ass off. And maybe I'm a terrible person.
My mother would slap my face.
Like if that had happened at my dad's funeral, I would have been like, oh, Dad would have thought that's hilarious.
He would have thought it was hilarious. My dad as well. Yeah, he would have gotten a big kick out of it. And it really isn't handled very delicately. It's very coarse and it's very, like I said, human. And it does almost bring out the clash of cultures, which in this film is an important factor. You've got lovely little charming Christine who's trying to elevate her position socially by her wealthy boyfriend, by her position at work. I mean, she's kind of like the classic young woman who's trying to figure out how to have it all. She wants a wonderful career. She wants a handsome boyfriend, you know, makes a good living, or he comes from a good family. You know, she's looking at her future. And then you've got this other culture, the Romany Gypsy culture, that goes back so far and so deep, and it's so steeped in tradition. And they don't sugarcoat that. I mean, it's kind of down and dirty. They got the body in the living room. They're singing and dancing and drinking. And it just really shows where the two worlds collide because of this gypsy curse. And how powerful these old beliefs, which is another very important layer or level in folk horror. Typically, folk horror is the spoken word, and where they may not tell the story, even though when Christine goes to the medium and she tries to rid herself of this curse, she does listen as the story of the Lamia unfolds, but so much of folklore and folk horror is spoken. It was the tales told around the fire. So all of these wonderful modern things that are spinning around Christine, and she's going forward with this lovely suburban life, you've got this old culture that's going to cancel it out at every single opportunity because she messed up and shamed a member of their clan, community, tribe.
Yep. Now, I love this scene. This is probably my second favorite scene in the movie. The first being the car at the beginning. That when Mrs. Ganush pops up in the back seats and then everything that happens. That scene is just glorious. But this is my second favorite scene. I love how the one answering the door is like, oh yeah, you're going to fix it? Oh, sure. Come on in. Like, it's so messed up. Like, she could just be like, hey, she died. Like, there's nothing you can do. She could close the door in her face. No, she's not doing that.
I have 5 younger sisters, James, and I have at least 2 of them that would have answered the door the exact same way. Oh, yeah? What are you going to do about it? She's dead now. And what are you going to do about it?
I just love how easily she could say it. And instead she's like, come on, let's go see it. Let's go see what you're going to do. And then everything.
To fix this. And you're hearing the, once again, classical wail of the violin in the background as they're playing these mourning songs, as they're playing these tributes to this woman who is now dead. And the scene in the parking garage, and once again, we won't give too many details because we do want y'all to watch this film, and it is on Netflix. And James just told me it's only going to be on for another short period of time because there's a rumor that they're going to do a sequel to it. I don't know how the hell they're going to do it with the ending, but I bet they will. Those things don't enter into sequels too much, but without giving it too much away there, in this scene in the parking garage, there's a physical altercation between this frail little old woman, Mrs. Ganush, before she dies, and Christine in her car. During this scene, Mrs. Ganush pulls a button off Christine's jacket, and this button literally becomes the key to her destiny. Everything that happens to her afterwards happens because of this button that she has, that the curse, the power, the possession by this demon, the Lamia, is now in the button. And this is interesting, James, because I did a little research and reading last night. There is actually a provision in Romani Gypsy burial rites for gifting something that the person owned, either a button or a piece of jewelry or something small, gifting it to the body because the soul technically never dies. In other words, you're transferring your human energy to the body, as it were, because they believe the soul never dies. So this button, and Remy was masterful in this because obviously he did his homework too. This button now becomes the catalyst for everything that happens to Christine after that. And what comes to pass is she goes to see a medium, and after that, the medium says you need to make a blood sacrifice. Now, here's where we're going to go into the scene in the movie that most people will probably object to, James. And you know what I'm talking about, and it involves the cat.
Yeah, poor kitty.
I know. But Christine is told that in order to rid herself of this demon, of this possession, this curse that this older woman has put on her, she must offer a blood sacrifice. Once again, one of the 5 top categories of classic folk horror. There has to be a sacrifice, a ritual, a blood sacrifice of some sort involved. So this button becomes the whole catalyst in the whole thing. And Christine truly believes that once she does what she does, everything's going to be free and clear. She's made the blood sacrifice. And during this time, she's seeing dark shadows in her bedrooms, and there's banging on her door. This girl's only got 3 days to get rid of this so-called demon before he literally drags her to the underworld. And it's really interesting because, once again, in my reading last night, one of the characteristics of the classic Krampus, which is the Germanic celebration that's going on now in Austria and Germany and over there, the anti-Santa or whatever, is they would say that if children were bad, he would drag them to the underworld. So there's so many parallels in some of this. So she's got 3 days to get rid of this curse. She makes her blood sacrifice. But then what happens? It ain't good enough. This Lamia, this demon, is not appeased. It's kind of like, what else have you got? Give me more. And this is when she goes once again to an exorcist to try to rid herself of this. In the meantime, she and her lovely boyfriend are having all of these conversations. Yes, honey, I know. Yes, you're so stressed. Yes, I believe you. Just like a good boyfriend should. If I had come to you at the Stanley and said, James, there's 3 faces in my mirror, I would have hoped you believed me too.
I would have been like, I gotta go, but thanks. No.
When I go to
I know me. I would have run right up there. I'm an idiot. So
well, when I go to my husband and I tell him I see something outside, he just rolls his eyes at me like, get a shotgun, Ruth. What are you telling me for? He just doesn't believe me. He's like, your head is so full of stuff. He says, I wouldn't know if it was real or not. So she goes to an exorcist, which is her final, absolute last resort to try to rid herself of this. And you can tell she's run down. She's not sleeping. Her boyfriend has had it with her. He takes her to dinner at his wealthy parents' house. And that's another wild scene, in my opinion. She's totally hallucinating. She's got these upper crust folks that she's trying to impress. And she's having these horrible experiences, whether they're real or not. Now, we know they're real because this Lamia is hot on her ass. But, nobody else knows they're real. They think she's taking drugs or she's drunk or she's mentally unbalanced. And the parents are telling her boyfriend, what the hell are you doing with this girl? It's just adding another layer of abuse or burden to this young woman who's already under so much pressure. And we won't mention what goes on at her job at this point, but basically she's lost the ability to be in the running for the position she was in. She's acting up at work. Her nose is bleeding. She's losing papers, being accused of losing a major account. Some of it is sabotage by her competition, and some of it is just Christine basically mentally imploding at this point. And it goes to the initial point that this girl was beaten down before she even got it started by this whole thing.
Shouldn't this bank manager have known something was up by this nosebleed? This is not a normal nosebleed. This is as close as you get to a Sam Raimi Evil Dead 2 blood fest as you can get in this film. She just sprays blood everywhere.
Bleeding out at the bank, yeah.
Like, there's nothing normal about this. They're like, oh, you need to go. And I'm like, I would have a lot more questions than that.
It's like far off, Christine. I mean, it's so condescending, but it's so classic Remy once again. Yeah. I mean, the scene and the blood is just, like you say, spurting all over. It's like a spaghetti Western in slow motion. And that's, I love that kind of horror gore aspect of the whole thing. But the condescending way in which she's treated through the whole thing. And even though she has got a loving, compassionate boyfriend, he's also a little condescending because you can tell he gets to a point and he's just like, I'll do this for you, but he's kind of hoping that it's the end of it. And it's a little, I would say, you can see his tension when it's not the end of it. And he's basically the one that gives her the money to go see this exorcist that is the end all and be all to all her problems. She's running out of time, and it's an expensive proposition, as we all know, to get demons taken out of you. So she doesn't have
Tell me about it.
Yeah, I mean,
that's where all my writing money goes.
I mean, inflation. I mean, it's getting ridiculous. I heard 20 grand was the going rate recently. So she gets the money and she goes and they do the exorcism, and the button supposedly is placed into an envelope, and everything is, there's some really bad juju that happens during the exorcist. They actually bring in a goat so that the Lamia can inhabit the body of the goat. Once again, like your theme for the month, James, classic possession. Everything is somebody jumping into somebody else's body and somebody's curse, forcing somebody to run away from the demon who's possessing, who they sicked on you. Everything is possession you're doing this month, James, with your podcast. So they try to get this demon to go into the goat, and there's another young man there, Milo, and he cuts the goat's throat. Well, all hell breaks loose and nothing goes well. And once again, it's a campy, over the top, almost like, Jesus, this is becoming laughable scene. It's just classic. It's just messy and gory and loud. And it's just your once again, stereotypical seance scene gone wrong kind of thing. But in the process, she learns that the button in this little paper envelope, this little vellum envelope, if she gifts this button to someone, the curse is going to pass on to them. At this point, she's only got about 24 hours left. I mean, and we are doing the Cliff Notes version of this movie, but she's running out of time. I mean, she's got to get this Lamia off her back or she's getting dragged to hell, basically. This is where, when we were talking about the weight of her decisions, she makes a decision at this point that I stopped rooting for her. I wanted to slap her face. Do you remember what it was? With the button.
Is this when she starts like calling Stu and stuff that you're talking about, or?
Well, she tries to pass the button to someone.
To the old couple. Yes.
She tries to get rid of the button in pretty nefarious ways. She thinks that, she's not being real selective about who she gets the button to. And I even think she considered giving it to her boyfriend at one point. She just wanted the button off her back. And this is where she's so stressed out. And, people always say people are good people until their circumstances change. And I firmly believe that. And I think all of us don't really know what we're capable of until we're forced into these rough situations or these circumstances that our normal method of coping it's outside the framework of that. We have no resources. We don't have any tools to fight the problem. So we start making decisions that we wouldn't normally make in the situation. Then we get to the next classic scene that it's so over the top when she goes to Mrs. Ganush's grave and it's pouring rain and she's digging down in the dirt and she's trying to get the body because she wants to shove the button into Mrs. Ganush's mouth. Now, this is how desperate this little blonde suburban girl is down digging in the mud and the rain's pouring and the lightning's crashing.
I was going to say, she didn't even check the weather report. She could,
If I'm gonna go grave robbing, I want a little sunshine and maybe a bottle of bourbon with me. I don't want to make it any harder on myself than it has to. It should be an enjoyable, memorable experience.
I guess she didn't have days to wait though, so she had to deal with whatever weather she had.
A day at this time, and the way the movie is filmed. And it's beautiful to watch throughout. And I know nothing about filmmaking, but I know what I like. And there's a consistency to the coloring and the way the angles are shot in the film. There's something really unique about this film. And when she's doing this absolutely heinous deed, you can smell it and you can feel her disgust. And she believes if she shoves this button in this corpse's mouth, that the curse is going to be gone forever and everything is going to go back to normal. And this is where we come to not only the climax of allegedly the curse, but also what's going on in her private and her professional life in terms of her job. And the bank manager making his decision for who's going to step into the managerial position.
Mm-hmm. And I love so before she goes to the graveyard, first she almost gives it to the older couple.
Right.
And I think that this is interesting because she's looking at it as he doesn't look like he has long to live, but that's not what the button does. The button eternally damns you. And I think that's what pulls her back. I think if it was just that it's going to kill you, I think she could have made this choice. But so she has this stranger that she doesn't know that she could give it to, doesn't do it. She makes the right choice. Then the guy who's screwing her over at work, she calls him down there and she can't do it. Like, even after everything he did and he admits what he did, she still can't bring herself to do it, because on some level, eternal damnation is not worth, or what he did is not worth eternal damnation. And I'm amazed that she holds on to it at that point. And just to back up really fast, the first time I ever saw this, I thought she was going to give it to the boyfriend's mother. I thought that was the target, right? And it doesn't happen, and I'm so amazed by that. But yeah, I really like her path of having these almost moments and not being able to bring herself to do it. And then she goes after the one person that she views as causing all of this. And I gotta say, if I arrived at the cemetery, I would like just drop it off by the grave and be like, "This is yours now." I wouldn't think to dig it all up and shove it in her mouth. That is interesting of a movie, though.
Yeah, and I think you're bringing out the one of the main themes of the movie is humanity. She hangs on to her humanity throughout, regardless of all the terrible things that are happening to her. And I think that in a lot of horror, whether it's film or whether it's written, we tend to connect to characters that hang on to their humanity, because once you lose that, you're as bad as the threat from the dark side, be it physical, be it cosmic, be it supernatural. As long as you still hang on to your humanity, we're going back to the classic good versus evil once again. So she stays in the light. She hangs on to humanity throughout. What I think makes this movie an absolute classic and a gem is the last 20 minutes or so of the movie. And I the first time I saw this film, James, I remember screaming at the last scene, like, oh my God, I couldn't believe what I was seeing happening. So after she goes through all of this, and she and her boyfriend think everything's calm, she's gotten rid of the button, she doesn't feel the hallucinations. Then she realizes
she gets the promotion.
She gets the promotion, but that's because her competition cashes on his humanity and does something really terrible, not just to her, but it's just a low life thing to do. You wouldn't do it in any professional capacity. I won't say unless you were a politician and get away with it anymore. But he does something really, really crappy, and he's caught red-handed doing it. And she does get the position. Her boyfriend is about to propose to her. And once again, I am not a spoiler girl, and I will not give away what happens, but there's a twist there, and it's a major twist, and it's a well done twist. We all wish we could write something that came full circle as well as this movie does. Just when you think you've got it all figured out and you see the path it's going to take, but there's always that niggling little feeling in the back of your neck where the hairs on the back of your neck are standing up and you're waiting for it to happen. I truly thought what happens would happen to her fiance, her boyfriend. I truly thought he would be the one to bear the brunt of it. And like I say, in the last few minutes of the film, I never saw that coming the first time I saw it.
I actually would like that, because she'd be losing one of the things that she truly cares or seems to truly care about. And I would like that, something bad happens to Justin Long in a horror movie, because that's how it's supposed to be. But
maybe they'll do it in a sequel, but he's pretty major now. But I could see where maybe he'd try to do something in terms of necromancy or something like that. But I honestly felt like he was going to be the one to suffer or be damned for her actions. This curse was not going away. She tried to shake this thing every which way, every angle, she invested in it. She tried to do it all right according to the information she had. But that's the problem with curses. We don't have all the facts. We don't know all the details. We don't know all the might happens and could happens and what can go wrong. We only get the verbal folklore of the Lamia, the demon. There's another scene in the movie that goes back, and I think it goes back to the 1950s, and it involves a young boy named Juan. They do a flashback happening in Mexico, and Juan steals a necklace out of a gypsy wagon, and this young boy gets a curse put on him. And we see that things go very bad with these curses when you do something to people that have the power to curse you. No one is exempt, and terrible things happen to this young boy and his family. But no one is exempt, and we don't know exactly how to break these curses. We all think from the movies or books or whatever, oh yeah, you just do an exorcism, or oh yeah, you just sprinkle holy water. We got the silver bullet. We got the stake through the heart. We've got so many ways to get rid of what are technically and actually curses. You're damned. Whatever you become, whatever the solution is, you are damned. And we just don't know all of the details. And in Drag Me to Hell, there's a few things that happen, like I say, in the last 15, 20 minutes of the movie, and you realize that there's a lot of ways for this curse to go wrong. And even though they believe they've solved the problem, Christine thinks she's gotten away with it, her life is going to be golden going forward. There's some conditions in this curse, and if you don't get it exactly right, if you don't carry out the ritual as it's intended, once again, classic folk horror, you're probably still not going to walk away intact, as it were.
That's actually one of my favorite things. I love when humans think they know the rules, but they don't. Or they don't fully know the rules. Like they get super close, but we're messing with things that we literally can't comprehend. And so why would we know the rules? And I'm not saying every story should throw that out and that should be the answer, but when it happens, I love it so much. Like, even like when people think, like in some movies where zombies are a part of your world, so you've already heard of them and you think you know what to do. I love when they don't. Like they're following some movie rules when in reality it doesn't work that way.
Right.
I always just find that so great. And
well, that's exactly my point. And I think it's also our intrinsic need to control. And we think we have the answers. We think we've got this under control. When you are dealing with a decades old, mysterious, dark gypsy curse, once again from another culture that is not your own, and you do not know all the facets of what could happen or how to resolve the curse, it's arrogant of us in any situation to think that we've got the answers, whether they're zombies, whether they're demons, whether they're vampires, because these things are old and these things are whispered about. And maybe there's a Van Helsing. I'd like to think there is, but I mean, we just don't have the answers as to how these things work. And it shows the hubris of Christine and the other characters, her boyfriend, the people that are on her side that know about this, that genuinely think they got it all figured out. They beat this curse. It's out of their life. They're going to go forward. That isn't how it works. And I'll go back to Richard Bachman's Stephen King's novella, Thinner. Again, the main character thinks he's got it figured out. Oh, guess what? We didn't tell you, but by the way, did you, or, well, you should have done this, because in our arrogance, we're so busy or we're so occupied trying to go through the steps as somebody who thinks they know something is telling us, we're losing sight of the fact that we don't know anything. This is all bigger and older than we are.
Well, and one of my favorite things with Thinner is the very end of it. And that ending has always stuck with me from the first time that I read it. Just the way that we can get blinded by our own arrogance, our own revenge. Just he misses the most obvious thing. And it's glorious because even as a reader, you kind of miss it. And then when it happens, you're like, oh, fuck. And I love how we can just get lost in that. And I feel like Christine gets lost in that. She thinks, oh, I did the thing I know I need to do. I'm done.
Mm-hmm.
And all she had to do was check. And she didn't check. And that's it. She missed this one little detail, the same as Thinner, missing one major detail there.
Right.
And that's so human, thinking that you're completely in control and missing something that's so
obvious.
Yeah. It's glorious.
And that last scene, once again, the way it's filmed and the way it happens, and you literally think, like, oh no, this isn't going to happen. This isn't really going to happen. Oh, damn, it really did happen. And there's so few movies for me, James, that I actually get that I actually, I like you. And I mean, we read so much and we watch so many films. And I mean, we're immersed in the genre because it is so visceral and it is got humor and it makes us laugh and it makes us feel something. And I always say, the two main emotions we have is humor and is horror. We all kind of love to be scared, or we react to being scared, and we love to laugh, or we react to being laughed. We react to humor. We like to laugh. And that last scene, you want to laugh, but you want to scream at the same time. It gets all of those emotions from you. Because when I was watching it, and I do remember the first time, I kept thinking something was going to happen to change it. And when it didn't happen, and you're sitting there and you get that holy shit reaction from a movie, and there's so few of them. One of the ones that gave me that recently, and there aren't a lot of them because I'm pretty particular with my movies anymore, was Last Train to Busan. The last theme of that movie is absolute genius. It's genius, in my opinion. It is so good, and it pulls out every emotion you've got, and you're almost crying tears of joy at that point because it does what a really good movie is supposed to do. It makes you feel something, and you think you've got it figured out right until the end, and then boom. And that's honestly, James, that's my big critique of a lot of the current films. They just don't have that for me. And I'm not saying they're all textbook, but I'm saying there does seem to be a formula in place. And I understand with the streaming services, they need new content constantly, to lull in the subscribers and all that, and to keep people watching, keep the numbers up. But the movies just aren't doing it for me. The other one that I really liked that I watched not too long ago was Mr. Harris's Phone, which is a very simple little movie. Once again, it's based on a Stephen King short. Have you seen it?
Yeah, I have. Yeah.
And the last scene in that, I think, is one of those gut punches. You know what I'm saying? Like, you didn't see it coming. And to me, when a movie can do that and drag me to hell, absolutely does it. You're so invested in this young woman. You're so invested in the story. I mean, you got the classic good guys, bad guys. You just want her to prevail. And I love it when they flip us on our ass and say, na, 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 na. You know what I mean? I love that. And there's so, honestly, for me, there's so few films that actually really are capable of doing that recently. And I'm always hopeful, but Last Train to Busan was the last one that really, I was sitting up and cheering at the end of the movie kind of thing.
It's one of my favorite movies.
Oh my God, it's so good. It's so good.
We did an episode on it with Michael Brandt Collins, so check it out if you haven't listened to it. But I think one of the things that I find fascinating about this film that isn't really ever shoved in your face, even though it's always there. Christine never fits in anywhere. She doesn't fit in, like even in her own car. She's trying to change herself at the beginning. And then she's at this bank, which is the closest to fitting in, it seems. And she still doesn't. She's still looked down on and expected to do tasks that are not her job. And then her relationship, like she seems to sort of fit with just him, but when you involve the family, she's definitely out of place. And he makes, I want to just say, he's a pretty decent boyfriend. He's not perfect, but he goes further to give her the things he wants, even when he doesn't agree with them or believe in them. And I found that fascinating. I don't see that often.
He listens to her, which is the number one key in any relationship, in my opinion. He listens to her, and he may not like or believe or want to validate what she's saying or what she's going through, but he does listen to her. I totally agree.
I mean, he's still a jerk, like trying to outdo the medium and explaining different things he's read in textbooks, but I found it fascinating that they could have made him a total douchebag, and instead he tries to get his point across, tries to convince her, and then gives in and always helps her with it. And I thought that was a really cool little thing to add to him. But even at the end, he's trying to help. He's like, look at this good thing I did.
Yeah. Well, if you remember what he says, and I do not want to give a spoiler, but even right at the end, he's begging and pleading, and he truly loves her, and he doesn't want bad things happen to her. I mean, he's willing to do anything to save her, as it were. So we'll take it back to the classic, knight on the white horse, the savior, the damsel in distress. I mean, there's so many classic tropes that are kind of touched on loosely, but you're right. Christine didn't fit in anywhere, and she made these choices and these decisions and had this moral test of her own faith. And I see it a lot. And I'm not being judgmental, but some of these girls that just try so hard, whether it be in life or it's social media or it's the influencing culture, they're willing to do things that technically aren't who they are as people. And I have no problem with creating a persona other than your own. I mean, as writers, we do that all the time. But I think in Christine's case, she was so anxious that the choices she made, she was willing to give up that part of her, and she maintained her humanity. But I think that there could have been a point in there where she said, screw it, I'm just going to do this because this is what I want. It's that immediate gratification culture that we live in currently. But once again, this is a 2009 film. And things weren't that different then. It's people keep saying, oh, well, it wasn't the same. Yeah, it really kind of was. If you're young and pretty and female, you kind of have to try a little bit harder to get ahead, whether it's in your personal life and maintaining your relationship, whether it's in your professional life to be taken seriously on your own merit and credentials. It's just a classic definition of what a lot of young women go through. And you're absolutely right. She didn't fit in anywhere. And I think that was why she was so easy for the demon. She was so easy. If you remember one of my very favorite movies, The Witch, and we could talk about this all day long at different levels. And I was on a folk horror panel, and I'm trying to remember if it was StokerCon or AuthorCon or one of them. And we were discussing witchcraft and folklore and that type of thing. And I learned something interesting from talking to somebody who actually worked on the film. There has to be an opening in a person's personality. There has to be a vulnerability for evil to come in. And in The Witch, And a lot of people probably will rewatch the film. And once I tell you this, you will too. When the family, this puritanical family, is forced out of their community because they're not conforming to the beliefs, they're all willing to go it alone as a family and live outside the community. The young girl is the only one who turns and looks back, showing that her convictions were not firmly in place like the rest of her family. Therefore, as the movie progresses, she became the portal for the demon or the evil or whatever. In Christine's case, I think you just hit on a real good point. There was a vulnerability to her in the fact that she didn't have the confidence, that she didn't fit in. I don't think personally, I mean, we could talk good and evil and semantics for all day long. I don't think evil can get in unless you invite it in, or you've got a vulnerability that it can prey on. And in Christine's case, I think you identified it as the fact she didn't fit in. She wasn't her own person. She was still trying to find her place in the world. That's real easy to take advantage of if you're a predatory demon.
Yep. Or just a predatory man.
A predatory man, a predatory woman. I gotta tell you, the biggest I've had 2 quote unquote stalkers in my life, and I think it's a harsh term. It can go in many. The worst 2 I ever had to deal with were also female. So, there's so many things that go on in the world we live in, but ultimately there has to be a vulnerability that allows the evil to seep in. If she had been strong-willed and a woman of conviction, I don't think the Lamia would have had a chance with her. That's my opinion. I think she would have kicked the Lamia to the curb. She would have gotten to the curse and she would have said, yeah, screw you, and figured out some way to get it in. And he would have gone off and bugged somebody else. But she was basically a scared young woman. And that was her downfall. That was her doom.
Yeah, it's something to feed on, basically. Yeah. So I don't know if you've ever looked at the script for this, but there's a couple sites that analyze like the first pages of scripts or the first couple pages of scripts. And I wound up on one that was looking at the first pages of this script. And it was interesting how it's very similar, but it's different. The setting's different. And there's one big thing that I love in the script that didn't make the movie. So that whole thing she does in the car where she's doing, what is it? When the mouth is round, something about the sound being,
practicing her elocution.
Yeah. It's good sounds abound. There we go.
Yeah, it was something very common because a lot of people say, and I do adhere to this, how you speak. You can get away with a lot in social settings you're not comfortable with if you learn to speak and elocute properly. And personally, it's one of my biggest bugaboos. They get these women, oh gosh, they do the weather, or that you call a call center and they don't elocute into the phone. She actually was practicing her elocution to try to elevate her position.
Yeah, but so that scene in the original script, she's doing that in her apartment instead of the car. Okay. And she goes to the fridge, and when she opens the fridge, the only 2 things in there are a piece of chocolate cake and a half-eaten grapefruit. And she starts to reach for the cake and then grabs the grapefruit. And I thought that was such an interesting, like just symbolism for the rest of the movie of, do you want this thing that you really want? Or like, do you want this because you're being healthy? Do you want, there was just so much there. And I'm surprised that didn't make the film.
I can see that as temptation. I can see the chocolate cake being the temptation, whereas the practicality would have been the grapefruit. You have this nice little secure life. But once again, and you just pointed that out, she was forced to make a choice. And the whole theme of the movie is about choices.
Yeah, I loved that. I thought that was such a cool thing to put in there.
In that site, that sounds like a cool thing to look into.
But yeah, that's the last thing in my notes. I don't know if you have more or...
No, just basically that I feel the movie is an absolute classic and everyone should add it to their horror catalog must watch. And watch it with a sense of humor and an open mind. And yeah, some parts may feel quote unquote outdated, but the special effects, and once again, I give props to the director because he did cool things even way back then. You've got to take it for what it is. Don't compare it to the technology of the current run of films, because you are not going to have the tight editing. You're not going to have the best of the special effects. The seance scene is particularly laughable, but enjoy those scenes because it truly is classic horror, which does take us back to ultimately you've got your good versus your evil, and who's really the good and who's really the evil. And we didn't get into the social ramifications of the whole thing where, you've got the predatory bank preying on people that they could have given an extension to. And they choose not to give it to this elderly woman. And I mean, how absolutely applicable is that to a lot of things going on today? So even back in 2009, this message was still there that, everything is so in control of our day-to-day lives, and all it takes is one misstep. Like apparently Mrs. Ganush was behind in her mortgage, or she was an elderly woman. Maybe she didn't know she was behind. Maybe she didn't have the ability to walk to the bank and pay her mortgage or whatever they did physically back then. But it's that moral thing again about not cutting people any slack because there's a superiority, or you think you know everything, or the rules are so hard and fast and black and white. But when you're dealing with curses, it's not black and white. So to me, that was a real strong point of the whole thing too. You've got the rigidity and the structure of corporate America, as it were. And then you've got, once again, this old ancient culture that knows things that these bankers can't wrap their mind around. So to me, that was a real powerful point too, how the social implications, even in 2009, are still relevant, which makes the film watchable and fresh to today's climate.
Absolutely. And even just how it's a game to the bank manager. Like if she would have gone out there and given the extension, nothing changes for the bank manager. He doesn't care.
Right.
Like he would have been like, okay, she got the extension. I guess you didn't do the thing I wanted you to do. And that's it. That's the game. The game has nothing to do with the money or the bank or doing this correctly. It's just purely, will you do this? And I fully believe that he had no intention of giving her the promotion, whether she did this or not. So it's even more of a game. There's no consequences to him. Nothing changes.
And that's a good word also, consequences. We're talking about power. We're talking about consequences. Well, the curse had a lot of weight. It had a lot of power, and there were horrible consequences. So who had the power ultimately? And I think this is true in a lot of our films that we watch, a lot of our horror movies or dark speculative movies. Who's really holding the power? Because in a lot of cases, I mean, you can use The Walking Dead for a classic example also. The power that the monsters or the walkers had very little to do with the humans involved. The humans felt they lost their power, but they really didn't. They did it all to themselves, as it were, by their choices and their decisions. So I'm seeing this theme play out in my head mentally with a lot of the scarier stuff or the horror stuff that I watch. It has to do with power. And is the power with the humans as it was in the bank, or is the power with the supernatural? In other words, the power of the curse in this instance, which completely shattered any power the other side might have had. You got your good and evil once again, but we don't know what's black and white anymore. It's all blurred.
Well, what's even weirder is Mrs. Ganush does the curse and there's no consequences for her. She was probably going to die in 2 days either way. It doesn't change what happens to her, and she doesn't have to live with any of it.
Right. But if you dig into it a little deeper, Typically, there's a statute of limitations on curses. You don't get an endless supply of them. So maybe she had been hanging on to her power, and maybe she seemed like she was a loved woman within her community, and she was a mother and a grandmother, and maybe that was her one time to use her curse. There's always a genie in the bottle. It's not an infinite supply. You don't get endless curses. I think that was her power, and she knew the consequences. But at that point, like you just said, she had nothing to risk if the Lamia came after her. She was done, and she knew it. But I think that it's also that the timing was right for her to use her power, and that may have been her one chance to call the demon.
Interesting. I did not know this, the limited curses. That's cool.
Oh, gosh, James, if you saw the stuff I've been reading for the research into our second book, yeah, there's kind of a statute of limitations on these things. You don't get an endless supply of them, and there's always a price to be paid. And this is, once again, typical folklore trope. If you invoke something, if you have a ritual, if you throw a curse out, there is always a price to be paid. And we don't know that Mrs. Ganush's death wasn't because she had transferred the curse, or she had thrown the evil eye or the curse or whatever. There's always a price to pay when you perform certain dark rituals.
See, this explains what happened to me at the Stanley and why there was a price to pay.
Right?
No, I'm kidding. I couldn't resist.
I want everybody to watch this film. I mean, I think it's a lot of fun. I think it's got some really great jump scares, which is something that I feel is missing in a lot of the current run of movies. I like it when I'm sitting there and all of a sudden it's like, holy shit. And you don't get a lot of that. And in this movie, there's some really fun jump scares.
I like when jump scares matter and when they fit into the plot. And I feel this movie does that really well. There are some movies where I'm like, that was unnecessary. That was just to scare me. And I relate it to like spicy foods. I can eat really spicy as long as there's flavor. When it's spiced just to burn your mouth, that does nothing for me.
I agree.
And that's how I feel about jump scares. As long as it's pulling in and it's adding to the film, fantastic. And this does that so well.
Yeah, they can't be gratuitous. It's like that with sex. I mean, every movie we watch, it's just, oh, come on. It's not just relevant anymore. You've got to have, like you say, you've got to have it have a place in the story. And I think that once again, because this dips into another culture that most of us aren't familiar with, there's a lot of different layers to that we're interested. So when something does happen, we're like, oh, wow. Yeah. Oh, yeah, I wouldn't do that. No, that doesn't look good. You want that feeling. And when the jump scare comes in, I think they are very valid. I think it's a masterful use of it. And the camera work, like I say, is also masterful.
Oh, yeah. He's always fantastic at everything he does. So.
Oh gosh, one of my favorites is The Quick and the Dead, and that's a crazy little Western movie too.
I love it. All right. So speaking of movies, what do you have any suggestions of what else people should watch if they loved this film?
Well, I do, and I'm going to base it on your theme of the month, possession. I've been dipping into more of the foreign films because, like I say, I read so much and I watch so much. I'm not saying I'm numb, but there is a formula in place, and they're just not affecting me, and they're not as memorable. There's a couple that I've watched recently. There's one called Hagazusa, and it's possession. And it's the transference of witchcraft, curses. It's a fascinating, fabulous movie. And then there's one I just watched the other day, and it's called You Won't Be Alone. And that's a story of, once again, witchcraft, folklore. Neither one of these are American films, so there's subtitles to both of them. This is about generational curses. In other words, curses that are carried on through generations. Therefore, and there's both, and like I say, I love strong women protagonists. So in Hagazusa and You Won't Be Alone, you're dealing with women that they're making choices, but they're still in a position where their surroundings may be so oppressive or remote, or what they have to deal with because of how they're born or what they're born into. So I tried to stay on the theme of possession, and those would be my two very highly recommended. They're not for everybody. There's a couple of scenes in Hagazusa, and I was like, holy shit, they went there. But I want that, because that to me is what makes a movie memorable. And then I just watched You Won't Be Alone with Naomi Rapport, and I hope I'm saying her name right, who I think is a brilliant actress. She also did Lamb recently. She picks these strange, unusual, fabulous roles, and she's the main character in You Won't Be Alone. And I just watched it the other day, and it also had an ending, and I was very satisfied by the ending. But you're talking about possession, generational curses, women in situations where they want to make choices or they don't want what they've been given in terms of the curse or what they are, but sometimes their hands are tied and they're helpless to change their situation. So those are the two that I really think are made an impression on me recently that I really enjoyed watching.
Nice. I always do a double feature. I went fully American and kind of mainstream crazy, but I'm going to suggest The Grudge. They're both very similar, actually. Vengeful spirits or demons, and over minor offenses, if you will. They both deal with like guilt and the mental and emotional state that comes with being stuck in this, the paranoia and the isolation and the desperation. And then I just think they'd be fun to watch together, because they're both kind of like walking that line of ridiculous and a couple scary moments and still having something to say. So that's mine. So I guess that brings it to you. Where can people find you on social media, buy your books, and all that good stuff?
I'm kind of all over the place. If you go to our website, www.brazenfolkhorror.com, you can learn all about Natasha and myself, and you've got our link trees there, which go to all of our social media on all of the ridiculous number of platforms that all pretty much have to try to maintain a presence on. But I'm on Facebook, I'm on Instagram, I'm on TikTok, I am on Threads and Blue Sky, even though I'm not using them much, but all the major ones. But our website at brazenfolkhorror.com will take you everywhere you need to be. Our books are actually in international distribution. Once again, if you go to the website, you can click around and you can find out where we are and what we are. Of course, we're on Amazon, the devil we all love to hate. You want to talk about possessed? It's just a demon, as it were, anymore to deal with. But we are on Amazon and all the major platforms. So
fantastic. And then nobody knows this, but we actually, for some reason, have a pretty strong following in Scotland. So since I know you're not going to StokerCon, is there anything else you would like to tell people?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I had to make a decision, and I'm not going to StokerCon. I've gone to the last two. I will be at AuthorCon in Williamsburg in April, and that is just so much fun. James, you got to make it to that one. It's under the umbrella of the Venerable Scares That Care nonprofit organization that does wonderful, wonderful things.
Absolutely.
Brian Keene and Joe Ripple are just absolutely at the top of their game, and they're so good to everybody. AuthorCon is an absolute blast. There's so many readers that come through. There's so many wonderful things to do in the area. It's a great place for a family vacation. Historical Williamsburg is right around the corner. The beach is right around the corner. There's a lot of things to do there. And then I'm not going to StokerCon in June because I will be at WorldCon in Glasgow in Scotland in August. And it's just too much to try to do and run a family and run life and put out work and everything. So I'll be at Worldcon in Glasgow, which is a major science fiction, fantasy, horror, everything you want to put under the major umbrella. And then I will also be at AuthorCon in St. Louis in October. And it's the first time they're having it in that part of the country, and the response has been absolutely wonderful. I'm still debating about a couple other ones. As you know, I know you're big in Imaginarium, and I know you're going to be at StokerCon, and there's so many good ones popping up all the time. You have to pick and choose. I mean, I would just be on the road like Tom Dede and, John Wayne Communell and some of these guys that I just love to death. But it's really hard to run a life and because when you're traveling all the time and you're trying to keep up your stock of books and you're trying to work, and the cons are our lifeline because the readers are our lifeline and they put you in direct contact with your readers. So I'm looking forward to next year being a really exciting year. And like I said, I think horror is here. I think it's making its mark. I think it's growing. I think women in horror are just kicking ass and taking names.
Absolutely.
I think the diversity in horror, I think we've got so many directions we can take it all in. It's thrilling and exciting and terrifying. There's a movie coming out, and I want to say it released yesterday, and the title is Pretty Things I'm Dying to See, with Emma Stone, and it's actually based on a book, but it's loosely based on a kind of Frankenstein story. So we're going to take this back to horror going mainstream with one of the biggest young actresses out there that I guess she's unbelievable in this main role. And it's in everything. It's little tidbits of it are seeping into so much, and lucky us that we get to play in this sandbox.
Absolutely. Well, fantastic. I guess that wraps it up. So thank you so much for doing this and for making me rewatch this that I hadn't seen in years. And then it was wonderful all over again. So
thanks again, James. I love talking to you, and we'll stay in touch, and I hope to see you in person soon.
Fantastical. All right. So I guess that wraps it up for this week. As always, I am James Sabata, and Don has run away from home, so he's not here for a whole month, but I'll still be here next week here at thenecronomid.com.